Greetings, citizens of the world. It's time you hear this. Help by spreading this information, leave a like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. A sobering new Foreign Intelligence Service (SVR) report circulating in the Kremlin today states that just hours ago, President Donald Trump, during a White House dinner with his top military commanders, suddenly turned towards the press cameras and cryptically stated that America was in a calm before the storm and that Russian intelligence analysts state is due to the unstoppable avalanche of evidence proving that the Las Vegas Pyramid Sacrifice Massacre shooter, named Stephen Paddock, was, indeed, an arms dealer working for both the CIA and Russia Mafia. According to this report, with the SVR already having confirmed that Stephen Paddock had been a gun-smuggling pilot for the CIA during their Operation Cyclone program to arm radical Islamic terrorists in Afghanistan in the 1980s, and further establishing that his massacre plans began after FBI forces loyal to President Trump took down the most feared leader of the Russia Mafia on 7th of June, and who was based in Las Vegas and protected by the Obama-Clinton regime for nearly a decade. The avalanche of true facts relating to this horrific massacre have become so overwhelming, YouTube has taken the stunning censorship action of removing videos questioning the official narrative, and that they did because of the elite's fears of the truth being known, as these now destroyed videos had received millions of views. With these truth-telling videos being censored by YouTube, who calls them conspiracy theories, this report continues. The SVR had previously documented that the words conspiracy theory and conspiracy theorists were completely made up by the CIA and who, in their 1967 memo, instructed the entire U.S. media establishment on how to use them in order to disparage and attack anyone not agreeing with the official narrative on who murdered President John F. Kennedy. For one to fully comprehend how the CIA creates their official narratives for the false flag actions they conduct, this report explains, one need look no further than the day after President John F. Kennedy was assassinated, and whose shocking moment when his head was blown off from the bullet striking his head from the front and whipping his head backwards, as documented by the Zapruder film, was, instead, described to the American people by CBS News anchor Dan Rather, the only reporter to view the Zapruder film the day after the assassination, as President Kennedy being struck by bullet fired behind him that then whipped his head forward, which was a complete lie, and as the side-by-side video confirms as being true, and the American people, also, not being able to see the Zapruder film for themselves until 12 years later, in 1975. With the evidence being overwhelming for decades as to how the CIA conspires with the U.S. mainstream media to spread their lies and deceits in order to cover up their false flag operations, this report continues, the note that Russian-American political writer Dmitry Orlov is now warning the American not to believe them this time about the Pyramid Sacrifice Massacre in Las Vegas, and who states, "Lies beget other lies, and pretty soon unbiased intelligence gathering, rational analysis and proper mission planning become impossible. A reputation for telling the truth can only be lost exactly once, and from then on the use of the phrase U.S. intelligence sources became synonymous with a conspiracy of barefaced liars. Whatever message Washington and Western mass media are trying to push, a perfectly valid response is to point out all the times they have lied in the past, and to pose a simple question, when did they stop lying? And as to if the CIA and their U.S. mainstream media sycophants have stopped lying about what occurred in Las Vegas, this report says, the answer is an unequivocal no. And even many in America are starting to see too, including the liberal writer Stephen Lenman writing his questioning article Was Las Vegas Another False Flag? And the conservative writer John Rappaport, likewise, questioning the official narrative in his article More Than One Vegas Shooter. The evidence builds and, most surprisingly, the former top President Ronald Reagan administration official Paul Craig Roberts pointing out the main absurdity being foisted upon the American people about this massacre, and who wrote, "The victims killed and wounded total 573. That number is the size of a military battalion. It is very difficult to turn an entire battalion into casualties with small arms fire even in a fierce combat situation. I don't know if it has ever happened. Can one person with no military training shooting down from 32 stories, which requires special sighting knowledge, at a distance of 390 yards, the length of 4 football fields, hit 573 people in a few minutes of firing? Aside from the absurd official narrative of the Pyramid Sacrifice Massacre in Las Vegas being that 10 minutes of intermittent rifle fire by a single person wiped out a battalion's worth of people 390 yards away, this report continues. Russian intelligence analysts continue to be amazed by the many links between the CIA and Stephen Paddock, and who have documented that Paddock was a CIA arms pilot delivering thousands of weapons to a Mexican drug cartel between 2006 to 2011 in what is now known as Operation Fast and Furious, and who used in these arms deliveries his 2004 Cirrus design Corp SR-20 single-engine plane having the aircraft registration number N5343M, and that FAA records show him owning from June 2, 2006 to February 13, 2010, but that is now owned by an American defense company named Volant, and whose motto on their website says, "Serving the U.S. intelligence community and the Department of Defense." In 2014, this report explains, it was shockingly exposed by a leading newspaper in Mexico that the CIA had partnered with a top drug cartel, and that Washington Times revealed the CIA's motivation for doing was due to the U.S. government fearing that the Los Zetas drug cartel would mount a successful coup d'état against the government of Felipe Calderón. As to how Stephen Paddock first became involved with the CIA, this report continues, was through his father Benjamin Hoskins Paddock, who was a member of the Chicago outfit during the 1950s that was ruled over by one of the most feared mobsters in America named Sam Giancana. Sam Giancana, also, this report explains, shared a woman named Judy Campbell with President John F. Kennedy, with popular American singer Frank Sinatra being the communication link between the two of them, but with Giancana becoming enraged with President Kennedy after the U.S. Justice Department, headed by President Kennedy's brother, Attorney General Robert Kennedy, began to target him and his criminal associates. In 2014, this report details, a Sam Giancana hitman named James Files confessed to being one of the killers of President Kennedy, stating that they were raided in this assassination by the CIA with another Giancana mob associate named Jack Rubenstein, aka Jack Ruby, being the triggerman who killed the President Kennedy patsy assassin Lee Harvey Oswald. After President Kennedy's assassination, this report continues, Sam Giancana's close ties to the CIA have been well documented, and included Giancana aiding the CIA with its many plots to kill Fidel Castro, and even more importantly, the CIA arranging to get Giancana crime associates out of U.S. prisons. One such Giancana crime associate aided by the CIA, this report details, was Benjamin Hoskins Paddock, who was known by Chicago police authorities to be part of that city's crime syndicate in the 1950s, and whom, by 1960, had become a notorious bank robber who the FBI captured in Las Vegas, thereafter his being sentenced to serve 20 years in prison, but with, in 1968, the CIA breaking him out of the U.S. federal prison he was incarcerated in, thus causing the FBI to list him on their 10 most wanted list. With the average time being 6 months before a person on the 10 FBI most wanted list is captured, this report continues, the CIA enabled Benjamin Hoskins Paddock to elude capture for 10 years until he was apprehended on September 6, 1978, and whose CIA aide saw him only being placed in prison for less than a year, but who after his release continued his criminal life, becoming that by 1987 saw him facing life imprisonment, but that he was able to avoid by his mysteriously settling the U.S. federal government civil racketeering charge by going from broke to his paying $632,000, and, also, paying a criminal fine of $100,000, and being allowed to move to Texas where he died 10 years later, in 1998, at the age of 77. Like his CIA-protected father, too, this report continues, Stephen Paddock, also, had millions of dollars of unexplained wealth, and was always reported to be upbeat and happy when buying his weapons and supplies, but with some of his explosives now being reported may have been used in last year's bombing spree in New York City. to the American people ever being told the truth about CIA arms dealer Stephen Paddock, or the CIA's complicity in this false flag pyramid sacrifice massacre, this report concludes, remains unknown at this time, but with very little hope given that these peoples will ever awaken to the monsters who rule over them, and,